Now, Teddy Roosevelt, there he is, our 26th president of the United States, taking office in 1901. But this is not the story of his presidency, but the story of how a man can overcome great loss to climb to a position of leadership that he could never have imagined. Theodore at 19, I'm not sure if you could recognize him in this fine group of gentlemen from Harvard. But Theodore is the one on the right, and he's up on the highest level there, and he has these great mutton chops and his wonderful leisure suit there. So this is Theodore at 19, and he is falling in love. And if you can see here, I wonder if you could see where Theodore is and who he is staring adoringly at. That is his love, the young lady he fell in love with. Love at first sight is what he called it. And it was, what a story really of the two of them. She is there in white. Her story is what novels really are made of. She's beautiful, she's dynamic, she's educated, and really what a wonder for me to be able to research and study. She had plenty to say. This was a quasi-feminist in the 1800s, which was quite rare, I'll be honest, as I was looking through the documents. She lived in a time and in the year that women were fighting to have the right to attend Harvard University. So the theme is educational rights throughout. That really came into play. But she was really her own person. And here we see her in the fashion of the time. And there she is at the center. But on the left, you see her with her group of girlfriends. And what a fun study it was on the times, the fashions, the beauty of the Gilded Age. So these were all part of the research. This is me with a pile of letters. I was so excited, truthfully, because not only were there letters, but there were beautiful photographs, and that few have ever seen these in nearly 150 years. I was really, beyond thrilled to be able to locate the documents, then transcribe them, and then be able to create their love story, one that takes the readers through the Gilded Age in the 1800s. It really was something else, and something you may be wondering is, why am I saying this is an exclusive type of story, being that it's so old? Well, surprisingly, biographers believed that the letters between Theodore and Alice had been destroyed, albeit a few. And when I started the research, though, I looked at the journals of Theodore Roosevelt, and he wrote in them every day and wrote things like this: "Words cannot tell how I love her. I doubt if any man was ever more happy than I am. Sometimes I almost feel as if it must be a dream. I don't think there was ever anyone like her." And after reading these journal entries over and over and over again, I really wondered to myself, how could it be that the letters would have been destroyed? Certainly Theodore would have treasured letters between him and his first love. And really, it was on a hunch that I started my deep dive into the life of Alice Hathaway Lee. And really, to my surprise, shock, really, the letters existed, the photographs existed, and the story that had been told about Alice in the past was actually dead wrong. You see, biographers had written about Alice and Roosevelt, but biographers of Roosevelt dismissed, disparaged, and in fact erased her from history. Now, Alice did not become the first lady, and spoiler alert here, I don't want to get into that and don't want to give away the ending, so I don't want to say that here. However, I do want to quote one of the biographers to give you a sense of what I was kind of experiencing as I was doing this research. So as I had said, the biographers had said that really these letters did not exist and the photographs did not exist, and again, disparaged and dismissed her. And here's what one of the biographers wrote. Alice, he writes, was a creature so bland and uncomplicated as to be incapable of spiritual growth. A few surviving letters are totally uninteresting. Alice would have driven Roosevelt to suicide from sheer boredom. And that is a direct quote from the biography called The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt, and really looked on as fact by historians since it was written. I was really so incensed by these words, and you can see why, because when you look at the letters and the photographs, there's such a relationship there that I can't imagine anyone writing anything like that, especially knowing that they thought the letters were destroyed. How dare you say something like that when you really don't know who this woman was? So again, I just became fully invested in telling the real story of Teddy and Alice and doing everything that I could to give her the voice that I believe she so rightfully deserved. And at this time in history, really, this fight that I was talking about for educational rights was really at the forefront. And with Alice and Teddy's life, I believe Teddy had a new understanding of the importance of equality. And really, he says in his writings that they shared a real love for politics and poetry, and they would debate all of these issues. And I wanted to show you something that I was really quite stunned by, and I thought it might be really interesting for you to see. Besides these beautiful pictures, that is Teddy and Alice in a tintype spree, they called it, in a photo studio in Boston. It's quite lovely. This was actually really before they started their serious courtship, and I got a chance to write about this in the book. In fact, I really drew upon all of the letters and the photographs in the writing and the novel. But I wanted to show you this. This is the first public speech ever given by Theodore Roosevelt. And in it, he says there should be the most absolute equality preserved between the two sexes. I do not think the woman should assume the man's name upon marriage. And I thought that was quite something, because he actually has that underlined there. Alice, when Theodore gave the speech, she was in the audience. This was during the commencement addresses at Harvard. So I thought that was quite something, that she was there. And this speech that Theodore gave, that I got a chance to see the original of, it was beautiful to see. I mean, you could see his handwriting is just so neat. But this speech was actually incorrectly listed throughout history as not a speech that Theodore gave, but as a thesis that he handed to his professor for his senior year at Harvard University. When in fact, speaking the words publicly, I think, has much more of an impact on people than if you just kind of hand a piece of paper over to your professor. So having this opportunity to really bring this story to readers as a novel was really an incredible journey for me. And I hope it's one that you enjoy as well. It's written as historical fiction and from the perspective of Theodore, then Alice, then Theodore, and forth and back and forth. It really allow you to feel the story from each of their perspectives. Teddy's words in the book are nearly his own. All of the dialogue was drawn from the letters in his writings, which are plentiful, actually. And I wanted to just read you one excerpt, and then I will take any questions that you have about anything. Really, anything you'd like to ask is fine with me. But this is from the first moment he sees her, the moment he himself in his diary that mentioned that it was love at first sight. And here was my take on what that would be like, love at first sight between Teddy and Alice. So here it is from his perspective. Intrigued, Theodore gazed at beauty from a distance. She looked as fair as a maiden, stepping from the pages of literature. All four seasons collided within this lady of singular loveliness, whose sway shifted gingerly like a falling leaf in autumn, whose gown shone brightly like shimmering flakes of winter snow, whose gait traveled lightly like the morning spring air, and whose aura glowed radiantly as summer rays off still waters. Watching Grace from afar and thinking it wondrous, Theodore's heart tipped a beat faster. Little did I know that at the time, those still waters ran deep, and that was quite unexpected for me to find. For Alice's part, I worked on developing a character who was really a symbol of the times and researched everything I could about her life, and was thrilled to see that she had so much to say and was the furthest thing from boring. And a woman that I felt very strongly should not only have a chance to have her voice heard, but have it heard loudly. And I'm glad to have been given a chance to give her that opportunity. So thank you so much for taking some time to be here. And I'm here to answer any questions you have and to talk a little bit more about any of the letters. But thank you again for being here. So does anyone have any questions? Yes. That's a great question. Where did I find the letters? So when I started the research about Alice, I searched everything I could from her daughter, and from her granddaughter and great-granddaughter. And through that, I was able to find a very small mention in a library bulletin that her great-granddaughter had donated materials from Alice Hathaway Lee. And I studied a little bit further and realized that what had been written is that some letters had been donated. And I thought, well, that's exciting. They quoted some of the letters as well. And I had read that, the letters had been destroyed, so I wasn't expecting much. However, as I looked into it further, some of the information had been digitized on Harvard's on the Houghton Library website, and it indicated that there were a number of letters. And so I had a chance to go up there to see them myself. And this was quite an experience, I have to say, because when I got to Houghton Library, and I had been listed as a research because of my first novel, so I was able to look at them firsthand. Anyone could be a researcher, you just have to apply. But in the Houghton Library, it's a beautiful, beautiful, refined space. But there are these gorgeous mahogany long tables throughout, and they invite you to sit at any one of them. You can't bring much in there except for your phone and maybe a legal pad and pencil. Of course, they don't want anything on any of these originals, so you have to be very careful. So I picked one of the tables, and they had my request, and they brought out a box. It was about this big, and I opened it up, and you have to be very careful with the way you touch any of the documents. In fact, you don't touch the documents, you touch a folder that the documents are in. And I looked at it, but I thought, oh no, it wasn't actually the correct letters. It was letters to another woman, who came after Alice, in fact. And I looked forlorn and kind of was sitting there, and the archivist came over to me and said, "Did I get you the wrong box? I think I might have gotten you the wrong box." And I said, "Do you have the box that I'm looking for? This is it." And I had, all of the call letters or what have you. And she said, "Well, it's going to take me a few minutes." So I waited there, hoping anxiously. And she brought up another box, and there it was. I mean, just this treasure trove of letters upon letters and documents and photos. And there was even a little small book of poetry. It was just a mini book that you could probably carry in your pocket. And so, boy, I mean, I was just, in fact, I was almost very emotional about it. I felt they were so painful and beautiful that I just didn't want to leave, really. I just wanted to be around them. And that's when I was able to take just quick photos of them so I could be able to spend more time with them, being that, the library's only open for so many hours. Joe knows, they're not going to keep you that long. And so after I had completed at least what the time I could there, I said, let me take a picture of me, with my phone, with the documents. No one's going to believe me. And so I just did one of those silly selfies of, me with the documents. And I looked back and I couldn't believe it. But at the end of the long table on the wall up to the ceiling was an incredible portrait of Theodore Roosevelt. And I said, oh boy, I wasn't sure. Is he happy or not happy that I'm here? But after that, I really treasured the letters and the photos, and I really wanted to do right by Alice. So I was very, very careful in crafting the novel and telling her story, and his too, of course. It's Teddy Roosevelt, so I wanted to be very careful with that. So that's how I found the letters and the photos. Now, the question some people have asked is, why hadn't anybody found them before? And honestly, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know why no one would have been able to see these before. Biographers, one of the greatest biographies that I had quoted was written before the letters had been donated to Harvard, but it is my understanding that the biographer had seen the letters after his biography had come out, but he did not amend any of the pages of it. Now, I'm not sure why that is, and I couldn't certainly answer for them, but it is a question, certainly, as to why. Yeah. So what I hope the novel allows us to do is to be able to extend the research and open up a new area of study about Theodore Roosevelt, because I believe that, especially at this time, I believe it's under-researched and understudied. And I think especially when you take a look at his first public speech, I think it says a lot about him, about his feelings. And, it's incredible to learn about a person in their teenage years, because you really see them as genuine individuals, and his writings are very authentic. And he's not sort of thinking through, oh, what if someone sees this writing? You're getting it from the heart. And that's it. For him, it was like passion was weaved through every fiber of his being. I mean, he was deeply in love with this woman from day one. And the fact that she was wronged and dismissed is just beyond me. I just couldn't even quite believe that that would happen to her or to anyone. And there it is in writing forever. So I'm hoping this gives us a chance to relook at her in his life and her influence. Yes. That is certainly an option for an author to relook at that and to see what has been missing in his biographies. Honestly, I hadn't even thought of that, and it's interesting that you bring that up. I was so caught up in the story of the two of them that it might be certainly worthy of taking a look at Roosevelt as a student at Harvard and truly focus on him as a very young man before he became the police commissioner of New York and the governor of New York and the vice president and the president. But wow, to really take a look at him as a very young man would be something. Theodore wrote quite a bit, and what you'll experience in this novel is how he became the cowboy that people know Theodore Roosevelt as. He spent quite a bit of time in North Dakota. And I think when you see the book, when you read it, you'll know why. I don't want to give it away. But it really, he's a New Yorker from the East Side who went to Harvard, but everybody thought of him as the Rough Rider. So he really was able to experience the nation. And a lot of that has to do with Alice Hathaway Lee and his relationship with her and what became of it. But thank you for that. That is something. Yeah, the story. So being that the story, what was quite incredible was to be able to understand how he felt and what he was going through during that tremendous time in his life. Yeah. 3 years was his time to overcome the loss. And that time was written about by him. I mean, he wrote what he was experiencing in North Dakota. I guess people deal with loss in very different ways, and for him, he spent the time by himself, and for nearly 3 years, and then was able to come back and overcome. Yeah. Yes. Sure. What led me to this research, quite a few years ago, I had the really great fortune of finding documents related to George Washington and his first love, who was actually not Martha, but a woman named Mary, who was from Westchester, and she was the richest single woman in America. Mary had been named a traitor in the American Revolution, and only 3 women were named traitors in the American Revolution: Mary, her sister, and a minister's wife. And I was curious about this, being that as a young girl, I had remembered seeing her historic home that still exists, and hearing that she had once been courted by George Washington. This is a long answer to your question, and I apologize. But when I started doing the research about Mary, and trying to understand what she did to betray the country, I found out that she did nothing wrong. I believe that she was wrongfully named a traitor in the American Revolution. Only 3 women were named traitors, and they were the only 3 women who owned real property in the colony of New York. And after that, I thought, well, that is unbelievable, really. I guess it is believable. What am I saying? But it got me thinking that maybe there was more to be told about that story. And it was like the documents were pouring out of the archives for me on that story as I was researching Mary, because it was a story of love, deception, and vengeance involving the American Revolution. What? I mean, how is this even possible? And I really was there with all of these documents questioning my sanity, because I had never seen this story. I couldn't quite believe it and myself. And I went back and forth to really determine whether this was actually happening, that here I was finding this incredible story. And being able to write that book, it was Dear George, Dear Mary, then the research turned into a Smithsonian Channel documentary. And there was one moment that I had to present to historians of Washington who hadn't seen some of these documents. And that I really had to really focus and make sure I had everything, the T's crossed and the I's dotted, to make sure I had all of the material that I needed. But what was wonderful about the outcome of that is that it did open an area of research about George Washington that I think hasn't been told before. So after that book, St. Martin's Press published it, they asked me pretty quickly that if I would do another book with them. And really one of the people I really thought might be interesting was Teddy Roosevelt. And John, as you mentioned, knowing that what the story was between Teddy and Alice, I thought, well, let me see if maybe the same thing happened to Alice. And in fact, it did. And oftentimes, truthfully, especially women whose writings are not usually preserved. I mean, this was an incredible find that her writings still exist. But, their stories are really never told. And oftentimes in historical fiction, they may not be told in the way that it really happened. So I tried as much as I could to be able to tell her story and give her a voice, but also make her a symbol of the generation, to open us up to looking at things a little differently than we normally do when we're reading about women in the 1800s. So that's the long answer, I'm sorry, to your question. Yes, John? Sure. So one of the things that I did find was that George Washington, as a young man, I mean, this is George Washington at 22 years old. He started courting Mary and fell in love with her. And it was actually written in the early biographies of George Washington that he fell deeply in love with Mary Phillips. It's clear as day. And the interesting part about that is that George Washington was in the British Army at the time, at 22. And was really willing to risk his life for the British. His writings all exist, so you can read his letters. You could really get an understanding of his feelings during that time. And he really was fearless. He was brave. He was willing to go in and do whatever he had to do and really risk his life many, many times for the British. Then comes along Mary and falls in love with Mary. Again, as I mentioned, richest woman in the colonies. So not only was George interested in Mary, but his commanders were all interested in Mary. His commanders in the British Army. And so I found this incredible document listing all of the men. In fact, the book that's out, the Dear George, Dear Mary, is out in the front, and you can take a look at it. But in it, you'll see the actual document. Is all of the men who were interested in Mary Phillips. When I saw this document, I nearly fell over, and I'll tell you why. It took me forever to get it, but it was at a library in California, and I was determined, and I was amazed when I saw it, because the names on this list of men who were interested in Mary Phillips were names I recognized. They were George's commanders. And I said, I know that man, because he controls George's finances at the fort that he's been commissioned at. I know that man. That's George's, the man who determines where he's going to be his next military move. I know that man. He's the general. And they were all interested in the richest woman in the colonies. And so they do everything, the commanders, his commanders, to betray him and wrong him and smear him, even in the papers. And then I found a newspaper article that was written attacking George Washington. And of course, I was curious, well, who wrote this article? I mean, could it have been one of his commanders? And all of that just kept going and going and going and going and going. And I was like knee deep in research. And I mean, and I really mean knee deep. I mean, that's how high the pile was. And so it was quite incredible to determine what came from that and how George just said, I'm out. I'm out of the British Army. And after that, he had not one good word to say about the Brits after that. And in fact, you know, we talk about tea being tossed into Boston Harbor. I couldn't find anything in his writings where he talks about the tax on tea. I mean, every letter that Washington wrote is preserved, so you can't see any of those. So I went through all of his writings to kind of get a real understanding. So in Dear George, Dear Mary, I really worked hard to understand his motivations and determine whether it was that, yes, that unrequited love may have played a factor in his feelings towards the British Army and why other reasons why he might want them out. And there you have the American Revolution. So, yes. Absolutely. That was fabulous. I mean, Alice, baby Alice, is a story. Oh, she is such a memorable first daughter, isn't she? But when we look at her mom was quite something too. I mean, she actually would go to the boxing matches of Theodore Roosevelt. Now I think, look at us, we're like, oh, and whatever. But at that time, that was like, what do you mean? She's actually attending a boxing match. She also was the first woman to enter a men's only private club at Harvard, and it was news of the day. She just walked in and she was very comfortable and she would do whatever she needed to do, and she was great about that. And she just did things that women of the time didn't really do. She went sledding with the guys. It's written in his journal entries, all of their dates, so I could see everything that she went to with him. And so that's what was really wonderful, to understand the daughter and to learn about her mom. And it was, and I actually found some wonderful writings that Teddy Roosevelt's sister had written about Alice to her daughter Alice. So all of that really made for beautiful documents to be able to have this great research about mother and daughter too. And I really, when I formed her character, I really looked at the daughter and added her into her mom's character. So that was really wonderful to be able to do too. Yeah, so the question is, Mary Phillips in the George Washington story, is that the same as the Phillips family that owned Westchester at the time? Yeah, I mean, they owned, I believe, 250,000 acres of property all along the Hudson River, including Harlem. I mean, they owned most of Harlem as well. So yes, that is the same family. This would be, you're talking generations later, after the first Frederick Phillips. So you're talking 150 years later about, yeah. Sure. Yes. You know, those are great questions, but my research really centered upon Teddy Roosevelt between 19 years of age and 24 years of age. So I love to talk about Teddy Roosevelt, but I don't feel like I am the right person to ask about Teddy at that time. I would love to be able to have all of that research to be able to talk about it, but I really focused on a young Teddy, and so that's where my research centers around. But these are great questions, and he's such a fabulous person to study. And I would love to really be able to hone in on the other years of his life. But I've really spent the last 4 years on a young Teddy Roosevelt and really trying to understand that and, you know, transcribing his work at that time. But yes, these are all great questions. And of course, Alice is a wonderful person to study as well, meaning Alice, their child. But thank you for the question, and I know it's fascinating to talk about politics of today for sure, and compare it to politics of the 1800s. Some of it is very much the same. You know, you see it repeat over and over again. Yes. This is a big thing to do. Yes. How would I frame it? Well, I wish you were with me when I was doing it, because oftentimes I was, pulling my hair to my head, crying, as I was reading them, and really trying to make sure that I can add them into the story and have the story move. It is a challenge when you're using historical documents of story, to be able to have them read as a novel, but also add them. And I've included many of the letters in there, and I would love to hear what you think as to how I did it, because it really took a lot of time and a lot of thought as to how I could best add these letters in without stopping the reader, completely. So in regard to these letters, everything I did, I went through Harvard University's Houghton Library and their archivists to make sure that they were comfortable with me using the writings, and that was all had to be cleared before I did any of that work. And so I really am so appreciative of them, as well as Sagamore Hill, as well as the Teddy Roosevelt Center. If it wasn't for all of the librarians and the archivists and those who worked so hard to preserve these originals, none of this would be possible. But it really just brings up one other thing as we were talking about letters. It's really too bad that everybody just texts nowadays. And so we've really lost this art of the love letter. And when you're out there, please, I brought some blank stationery notes and pens, so you can consider writing your own letter to somebody that you care about, because I think that it really was so meaningful to be able to hold these letters and see what it was like to receive such words of love. And it was really special. So I just encourage us all to maybe start writing more, because it really means quite a bit. Yeah. Oh, wouldn't it be great to... Well, we have one of our producers is here, so one of the producers is here, we could talk about it. Sure, any of it would be lovely. And what I wanted to do first, truthfully, especially in the George Washington research, was to be able to tell it as a documentary. And so when Smithsonian Channel asked to do it, I was really thrilled, because I wanted to make sure that the heart of the research got out there and allowed for people to look at these and study it further. But maybe one day it could be something like that, but that would be something else. Yeah. Yes. I treasured really the experience. It was like nothing I could have ever imagined, especially in this one, because their words are so intimate, and I really felt like, I hope they're okay with this, because I really was wondering, that they've been, hidden for so many years, and to be able to bring out writings of the Gilded Age and understand what his feelings for her and her feelings for him. I'll tell you, I was completely taken aback by it. Each and every letter, it was so special. Each one was something else, So If a Poem Could Live and Breathe is really just came out of my journey, because she really was like poetry, especially to him. And honestly, that's really what I believe he thought of her. He just when you think about poetry, these words, the words just jump off the page when you're reading certain poems. And in some cases, poetry can really take you through, great joy and then great tragedy. And so it really felt to me like one of those wonderful Greek poems that kind of encompasses every emotion. And that's where it came from, yeah. But thank you. Yes. Yes, so that's such a wonderful question. So the letters from him and the letters from her were all in the same space. And so I'm guessing that their daughter, baby Alice, kept both hers and his. And so that was how somehow they came together. And, they were together. So I would imagine maybe they kept them together. They weren't in chronological order. So her letters were in one section and his letters were in one section. So when I was doing the research, I paired them so I could match, he would say this and what would she say back. And so that was a lot of fun. But yes, they were all together in the same space. Yeah. And the fact that they were so perfectly, you can see them that they're in such great shape. There was not one rip or anything. Look at the black border around this one. And so, you're seeing an image. This is through a magnifier, by the way. The letter, actually, I have an exact replica up front we can take a look at. You can take home with you so you can have it. But the writing is so clear, it's not even faded. So whoever held these letters knew they were very important before they even were donated. They hadn't been they were donated 100 years after they had been written. So whoever kept them really was very careful with them. Even her writings are very clear, not a smudge, nothing. Every border, everything was perfectly preserved. I was really happy to see that. And so, yeah, that's my dog Lola, by the way. She's really uninterested in all of this. Only when a squirrel comes by, she'll just get very excited. That's a good question. I was really caught up in it. And so, how people maybe do yoga or other people paint? For me, my escape was writing and researching. And so I am an early riser because our show goes on at 4:30 in the morning. So I'm very used to waking up very early in the morning. So if you're up early, anybody, I'm up with you. So at least we're up together. So on the weekends, often I can get up very early and be ready to go. And so I would do that. We have 3 children. My husband is Mike Spano. He's the mayor in Yonkers. And we are very busy, as you can imagine. However, so on the weekends, honestly, I would take the time and get up before everyone else and do the work and get it done. And, I'm one of those people who really likes that and am very comfortable in that. Other people think I'm kind of cuckoo, and they're probably right. But it was such a pleasure for me to be able to spend time really with Alice that I was really grateful for that time with her, and to be able to be with these letters and transcribe them was quite something. And so that's really what I did. I really enjoy the work, and I enjoyed writing it as well. Sometimes, the blank page can be daunting when you're a writer, but it was also a journey that I was really willing to take and very happy to take. So. Sure, and that's a very good question. He was very sick as a young man, and his asthma created such a problem for him that he did not attend school. So he really never sat in a classroom as other students would, but he was so brilliant and had a photographic memory that he got his way into Harvard because he was just a genius. And that sickness is certainly a big part of the book, and takes him through really very difficult times in order to overcome that. And he was willing to do whatever it took. He really felt that the strenuous life was the life to lead, and he did. And he battled, and he really, it was incredible. What he put himself through, his body through, physically, in order to get stronger. He really felt that he needed to strengthen himself. And there was one incident where he's bullied as a young boy when he goes off to a camp up in the wilderness. His dad felt that he should spend as much time out in the outdoors as possible because his breathing was a lot better when he was outdoors. So he would do a lot of that. All of their vacations were planned outside. And so this one incident where he was bullied on the way to one of these locations, and he just committed himself to just becoming stronger no matter what. And he did. And that's a very good question. And it really, it made me think, what what comes of a person who has to fight a sickness like that and to overcome a sickness like that. So it was like throughout his life, he's trying to overcome something, and he gets stronger after it. So that was really an incredible part of the research, was understanding him as a young man. So there are a lot of writings that he had about being young, and so throughout the book, you kind of go back to his time as in his youth when he was struggling through that. That's a great question. Mm-hmm. Yes, Brooke. If I was to write another novel, I think that the one that I really am fascinated by is Abe Lincoln and his first love, who apparently was named Anne, and there's an incredible story about Abe and Anne that really hasn't been written about. The research would really, again, be quite a big, amount of work, for certain, exorbitant amount of work, I would imagine. But if I were to study another president, it would be Abe Lincoln. I think that would be an experience. But I don't know I'm not sure about that. Yeah. But I just think Abe Lincoln as a young man, he has some story. I mean, he lost his mom at a very young age, and actually constructed her coffin out of, he cut down the trees and all of that. And he was very young at the time when he did. And so he has another incredible story. So Joan is coming. I see she's wrapping me up. Well, I really appreciate this time. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks.